Watchwaking, the bi-weekly podcast diving deep into the world of watches, craftsmanship, and the industry. Join us as we uncover personal stories behind your favorite timepieces, explore the latest trends, and discuss business strategies. I am Elizabeth Isakova, your guide in this journey. Coming from a background in political journalism, I am excited to explore the intricate world of watches with you and ask uncomfortable questions. Whether you are a collector, enthusiast, or professional, watchwaking is your gateway to the fascinating realm of horology. Hello and welcome to the next episode of Watchwaking, and thank you for your support of our latest episode with Pierre-Yves Donzé, who wrote a book on the marketing concept of Rolex and its history. And today we're going to talk about auctions, auction houses, with none other than Daryn Schnipper. For those who don't know Daryn, she's the chairman of the International Watch Division at Sotheby and also a senior vice president of Sotheby, a woman who stood at the inception of the wristwatch auctions in the United States.
That is right, yeah.
Worldwide.
Worldwide, right, yes.
Yeah.
It's been quite an interesting ride, as they say.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. First, let's talk about the beginning, starting from the beginning.
Okay.
Could you please remind us briefly how did you end up in the watch universe?
Well, it was a kind of a fated thing. I had a friend in college whose father was a watch dealer, and he used to tell me about all of his travels. And I didn't really know what does a watch dealer do? And he would go to India and Egypt and all over the world. And I met the father, and he was in the midst of writing a book called The King Who Made House Calls, about King Farouk, because King Farouk was a notorious lech, shall we say. But the important part was that he was an amazing collector, and he had a vast collection of watches, in addition to many other things like silver, Fabergé, etc. Anyway, he was writing this book, but he needed somebody to do some of the research, and I was a journalism major at the time. In the summer, I interned twice, and he sent me, for 2 summers, he sent me to Sotheby's. And it was really interesting because I didn't know much about Sotheby's. In fact, the only thing I knew about Sotheby's was that they had an institute and that Caroline Kennedy had just graduated from it. So, that was it. That was all I knew. So I got there, and my remit was to go through all the catalogs because there was going to be a chapter called "Where Are They Now?" kind of thing. So what happened was when Farouk was overthrown, when there was a coup in 1951, they let him leave like within 24 hours notice, practically, and he could take just a few things. So they were left with palaces full of, treasures, essentially. So the Egyptian government hired Sotheby's to organize the sale, and the sale took place in 1954, I believe, in Cairo. And it was always called, it wasn't called the Sale of King Farouk, it was called the Palace Collections of Egypt, something like that. And actually they were building, was it the Suez Canal that they built? I can't remember anymore. Yeah, that we were underwriting it with the proceeds. So there I am at Sotheby's. I'm looking through all these catalogs and all of these amazing pieces. And I'm thinking, I want to be a journalist. I mean, I want to be sent to Oshkosh. I was from New York,
But you were interested in all those catalogs where you're attracted mostly by jewelry or watches straight away?
Watches, yeah, watches. Well, that was what I was meant to be looking at. So, but I really was. And then I did my junior year. I was in London studying, and they had an independent study was like 50% of the program. and you had to tell them what you were going to study. So I said, well, I want to study watches for the Chinese market. And because I knew all about them at that point. I mean, not everything, but I had a good intro. And I thought that was pretty fascinating. So they were fascinated that I would come up with such a unique topic. And as a result, I was an intern at the Victoria and Albert Museum in the metalworks department. And that was just amazing. And they also hired a tutor who was a watchmaker to tutor me in understanding the parts of the watch.
Oh, yeah, this is very important.
You know, it was a phenomenal experience. And I came back and I declared my minor, was at that point in art history. And the dealer, who had great connections at Sotheby's, managed to get me an interview. And the rest is history.
Okay.
So I started a month after I graduated.
But it was in the beginning of the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. But
1980 to be exact.
That's exactly 1980.
Yeah.
But the first wristwatch auctions, they started a little bit later. So.
Not really. My then boss, who still I'm very close to and still works at Sotheby's, believe it or not, he had already started putting a few wristwatches in 1979. So there were, 10, 15 wristwatches in a sale. And then, and then by 1980 there were a few more, but then in 1980 we started to really take more, and we didn't know what we were doing though,
because it was not that popular at the time. No,
well, it wasn't that popular at the time. It was really a rumor that started the whole collecting category, essentially because the rumor was that the Swiss, because don't forget, the Swiss are just coming out of the crisis, the watch crisis,
the quartz crisis.
Yeah. And there was a rumor that they were going to destroy all the mechanical machinery. And as a result, there would be no more mechanical watchmaking in Switzerland, which then led to the next chapter of collecting. Because once you close a chapter...
Yeah, you create desire to get...
Yeah. And many of the wristwatch collectors that I knew is exactly around then had started already in 1977, 1978. So in those days, you would have a catalog that was 3/4 pocket watches and maybe 1/4 wristwatches.
Yeah, not that much.
Yeah.
Look at the catalogs of now,
Antiquarium,
500s, 600 timepieces, Philips,
well, no, my point
200s.
is, that's for sure. But my real point is that those catalogs consisted of 75% were pocket watches, and only a quarter were wristwatches. And now it's kind of flipped.
So how does it change? What's made this shift from pocket watches to wristwatches? It was you who proposed, actually, it was you who proposed to make a special sale on the wristwatches.
Yeah. I mean, we broke away from the silver department, which I was part of, and started having our first standalone watch catalog in 1981, I think it was, which is exactly when the pocket watch market kind of crashed. Very nice. And we struggled for a few years, but we were learning more and more about wristwatches. But what really solidified the collecting category or the interest of people was that the first watch book came out, wristwatch book, I should add, came out in about 1983, I believe, and that was called Ombund Urin. And that was really exciting because you were presented with a range of wristwatches. And then soon after that, in 1986, you had Patek Philippe's second volume, which was entirely wristwatches. And that really opened up the doors. And by 86, things just went up and up and up. We were selling 1518s in the early 80s for $12,000. And then one day they were 30, and then the next month they were 40, and then finally, they got to 100, and, now they're off you go. And no one really knew the difference between a 1518 and a 2499 back then. In fact, I remember having a sale, and I had about 6 or 7 Patek chronographs. And I think they were all relatively different, but they basically all brought the similar prices, except for the one with round buttons, which brought double. So if it was bringing $1,200 for a regular one, the round button ones, the 1463s, were bringing $2,500.
But you just mentioned that's a very interesting point that at that time people didn't know that much the difference between the different references of the watch. How did you actually sell the watch if for others it will be for collectors, actually? Maybe for some collectors there were
we
collectors.
were all learning as we went along, and certainly the books helped. I was very fortunate in having a lot of Italian friends that already knew a lot. And then the books came out, and the reference numbers usually, for Patek anyway, are stamped in the case, unless they're really early, and then, of course, they're not stamped. But I always have attributed the growth to the books, because that's what sort of brought it all together.
The education.
Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, last night, one of the panelists said that when George Daniels' first book came out that he wrote with Sam Cotton, and it's all pocket watches, that was in 1966, I think he said. And that was when the pocket watch market really started to boom, because never had there been a book with so much variety and going from century to century, etc.
I think it's one of the most important topics for the auction houses, the knowledge, like education of the people, and also means of communication, because storytelling.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's everything.
Yeah, no question about it.
So coming back to the beginnings, the inception of all these wristwatch auctions, and if you compare it to the current state of the market, what is the main difference that you've seen from before? Okay, you also mentioned that in the beginning there were quite a few wristwatches in the catalogs. Now we know that there are hundreds and hundreds of them. Maybe something else?
Other than wristwatches?
Yeah. Oh. In the auctions. I mean, in the way the auctions are held, maybe something that's
we're doing
evolved.
Online, which is very, very popular. Something different. Well, we did rough diamonds. That was different.
Yeah, we will talk about it a bit later, because it's
really the pieces that are different. Now modern sort of has supplanted vintage, for instance, unless it's a really great vintage piece. And then, of course, it'll still bring, more money than any modern piece. But other than online, it's just the makeup of the auctions is different. The other thing that's different is that in the early days, before I started, the descriptions were very brief. Things were, in general, hardly illustrated. So you might have like a page of illustrations or 2 pages, and it wouldn't necessarily be at the same place where the text was. And there would be no footnotes. It was just much more minimalistic, shall we say. And then by the time I was there, we were starting with all illustrated catalogs, which had just started. And I remember for years I had to beg to get an all-color catalog. Finally, we got an all-color catalog in like 85, I think. But it was a big fight. And now you've got much more elaborate catalogs, elaborate stories. We try to disseminate as much knowledge as possible. One thing I think is important is that we don't work on commission. So, it's important, I think, that we're very honest at Sotheby's. And because I'd rather tell a client what's wrong with something than gloss over it and have them be unhappy.
But the interaction with the clients is also very interesting. And now I think it's completely different from what it's been before. So how was it in the 80s, 90s?
Leading up to the 80s, and maybe throughout the entire 80s, to be honest, it was mostly dealers that were buying. And, I think I might have said I don't know if I said this to you, but when I started with watches, most people didn't even know Sotheby sold watches within the company. So we were kind of the poor relations. But then when wristwatches really started to grow up, and now you see that we're one of the big departments. So whereas before you had auctions that were almost entirely made up of dealers, also you had very little phone bidding and few order bids. And I remember one day I was going into the bid department like 2 days before the sale, and I said, "Are there any bids?" Said, "No." and that's changed hugely.
Yeah, now I think they're because I think the communication now with the means, like with the new technologies, it's worldwide. The moment you announce the auction and the lots, like it's already gone. Like people already decided what they want to do, what they want to do.
You get hundreds of bids now.
Yeah.
So that's really changed, but also the makeup of the buyers has changed. They're mostly, I would say, I'm going to guess 50%, 60% are private, which makes a huge difference.
And also younger generation.
Oh, yeah. Well, the wristwatches are definitely the modern ones certainly are attracting a younger demographic.
Can you confirm that there is a certain trend for not only the younger buyers, of course, because I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, a couple of years ago with the inception of online auctions, it attracted more or less 40% of younger generation through the means of internet for selling online. But do you see the trends that there are now more of beginners collectors that are on the market than experienced people?
No, for sure. You're getting new people all the time. We probably have one of the highest rates of new buyers, never bid at Sotheby's, about all the departments, for instance.
Do you think it's challenging for you now?
Well, you mean because we have to educate people? No, I think it's fun.
So you prefer to work with someone and educate the person than to work with
Well, it's not like I prefer.
No, but
it's equally enjoyable. Because when you work with someone who knows what they're looking at, it's interesting to trade ideas and theories. And at the same time, when you're working with a client that is new, that's fun because you're opening their eyes to new things, new kinds of watches, and makers for that matter.
Yeah. And if we continue with this trend, have you noticed certain trends in the secondary watch market recently? For example, I think we've seen it like starting from last year, this particular love towards the designs of the 70s.
Yeah, that has been a huge shock. But I can understand
why is it a shock, actually?
Well, because for years nobody was interested. It is really fascinating, and I even appreciate them in a completely new light now. I see them.
Yeah, because it's interesting. We had a discussion with Emmanuel Gate, the creator of the Beast, this Royal Oak Offshore. And we spoke about the design of the watches and this current trend of coming back to the designs of the 70s and everything. And he said like that the interest is not yet enough towards the designs of the 80s and 70s.
That's true.
Can you relate?
I mean, you're still, well, in the 80s, you're still coming out of really the crisis. So the designs aren't so great. But 70s is much better. They're just more modernistic. I mean, look at our, as we said, rough diamonds. Most of those watches were from the 70s, I think.
Yeah, actually, let's talk about rough diamonds because it was a sale that achieved over 1 million, I think they gave it, yeah?
Yes.
It's amazing. We had the guys here before and they were like, okay, we hope that we will continue with the Sotheby's. But I think for Sotheby's, actually, I might be mistaken, but for me, Sotheby's, it's a reputable auction house.
No, I mean...
Very conservative in a way. And this is just like
that's what we
stepping out of the box.
Right, and that's what the goal was, to do something innovative and new and fun, and that would attract people at the same time as Watches and Wonders. And I think we achieved that.
So did you like it yourself?
Oh,
the collection?
I loved it. I didn't have much of an idea in the beginning what they were going to put. And then when I saw the final selection, I was like, it's just funny. I mean, if any of those watches on their own, with the exception of the Gilbert Aubert Patek, in a sale, wouldn't have done as well at all. It's, just phenomenal. They really work together, and they really were avant-garde.
Do you think this kind of sales is speaking more to younger generation, or it touches like the whole range
but
of
I had clients, regular clients, older clients bidding too. It didn't just, the demographic wasn't only young people. I don't know about in the room, because I wasn't in the room, sadly. I was in Hong Kong. But I had a lot of clients that bought in that sale.
So don't you think it's a kind of a sign of a notion that people want some changes in?
Yeah, I think so.
In the auctions, in the way it's done, the auction houses, because at some point I think it might be tiresome, like to see the catalog, to look through 500 timepieces, 200 timepieces. Of course, if you know what you're looking for, but for a newbie, for the person who wants to just the enter starts its own collection and find a nice piece, I think these perfectly curated small auctions are better, no?
Well, I don't know if they're better. I think that they're just something to add to our repertoire, because you're always going to have people that want a more scholarly approach. And I don't think you can achieve that without a catalog. But if you notice our important sales, we really started to decrease the number of lots so that people can focus more easily. And then there's the online catalog, and then they do focus on that afterwards.
And they can come and touch the watch and feel it.
I don't think one is going to replace the other. That's kind of my feeling.
I think that's great. That's a great feeling. But at the same time, we've seen some controversial stories in the past years on auction houses happening to the auction houses. Not Sotheby's, of course. But don't you think that such stories, they kind of undermine the trust in general in auction houses?
I think people forget. I mean, look at Only Watch Today. They still did, 38 million?
28.
That was a big controversy, wasn't it? So it doesn't seem like it undermines it. I think it's all about the people, the experts that are there, and their integrity. I can't really speak for the other auction houses. Obviously.
No, but it was also like some stories about the watches that were not being correctly marketed in a way. So these things, because I've read a lot of comments online about all these stories, and people say that's okay. I mean, we don't want to buy at the auction now or this particular auction just because we don't have trust in these people. Like, am I buying the proper historical timepiece, or it's something like, made up of different parts?
Well, I mean, look, we do everything we possibly can to authenticate, and we work with the brands, the ones that will work with us. Sadly, Rolex and Cartier are not as open to that, but other brands are, like Patek. You find very few fake Pateks in the world, and it's no coincidence. I'm sure, for sure, it has to do with the fact that you can get an extract. But I mean, look, if you trust somebody in the auction business, I mean, really, that's what it all boils down to. Who's in that company?
Yeah, I think it's a trust in person in the first place, then trust in a watch or in the auction house.
Exactly. And you know what? Sometimes the fakes are so amazing that they fool you. But, luckily, when we see that, we will pull things out, and we try to do everything we possibly can to vet the pieces.
In your opinion, how do you think that the auction houses can raise this credibility? For you, for example, if we're talking about Sotheby's, what can you propose? You said that you're checking everything, you're working with the clients, you're working with brands.
I think that more, everyone has to avail themselves of that, and I have a curiosity to do so. I do think my guys do that. And, we'll have discussions about watches. If somebody brings something up, then we'll fully discuss it. There's not much more. It's not like you can go to a school and study it. Unfortunately, you learn by your mistakes.
And mistakes are always chances. They're always there, and there are
Part
chances to make something better next time.
Oh, absolutely. We're always striving for that.
And if I may come back to your story at Sotheby's, last time we met, it was for the interview for Watches TV. And you told me a couple of your anecdotes from your past. One was about India Warhol sale. The other one was about this time museum.
Oh, yeah.
So could you maybe add something to any memorable sale that's... was
another sale? Or?
Yeah, it was close to your heart as well, or maybe some timepiece that was exceptional at some point. You never thought that it will appear at the auction, and then you found it.
Well, the Henry Graves would have to be that one. And certainly I did not expect to be selling it a second time. And it really became a little bit emotional for me the second time, because I know that the owner didn't really want to sell it. But then he decided to, and then he died the night before. And I really, was kind of overwhelmed when it was sold. I felt, wow. And, there's been a book written about the whole thing by Stacy Perman called A Grand Complication. That's what it was called. She was amazing. She really goes through the whole story. So that would be one. Then, let's see. Oh, of course, the Daniels sale, because I knew George Daniels quite well. And I was very lucky to have learned a lot about watches under him, because he was our consultant. 2006, for instance, we held a retrospective of all of his work for his 80th birthday. And all of his work had never been under one roof before together. He'd never seen it all together. And when we had his sale after he passed away, that was very meaningful. And the outpouring of interest was phenomenal.
And I think it was also emotional at some point for you
definitely.
as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, you think people are going to live forever, and then they just don't.
Yeah, but they live in their watches, like especially
Absolutely.
watchmakers. So
And the thing with George Daniels, I didn't understand that I was living through watchmaking history. Because when I started coming to Geneva in the mid-'80s, he was already trying to sell the coaxial. And he was, we'd come to Switzerland because he was our consultant, and everybody expected to see him at the sales. But at the same time, he was going around trying to sell the coaxial escapement. And my colleague Tina Miller would say, "Oh, don't mind George tonight. He's in a filthy mood because the Patek can't get his watch to work, and he just doesn't understand why they're so incompetent." And so he would tell us these stories. And that went on forever. And then finally, obviously, in 1999, Omega decided to buy the coaxial, and the rest was history. And I mean, he was really chuffed. But the funniest story is in 1988, when we had the Space Traveler. That is really close to my heart, come to think of it. Space Traveler #1, he was furious that it went into auction because furious for a couple of reasons. One, what if it didn't sell? That would be majorly embarrassing. And two, if it didn't make a lot of money, that would be annoying. And he also didn't expect people to put their watches in auction. So he was very grumpy prior to the sale, although his spirit rose when he saw the trapezes with the Space Traveler on them. So he became very happy about that. And then once we sold it for all of, I can't remember exactly, but around maybe $100,000, he was very happy. And I remember we took a picture under the trapeze, myself, Tina Miller, from London, who was my opposite number, and George. And it was, it's in my office. And I really prize that picture. And I prize all the memories I have of being fortunate to spend that time with him. So then when he died and we got the entire collection, it was equally emotional, I guess. And I cataloged that with Tina Miller. And it was just very exciting to see how revered he was and how great the prices were. And then after that, we sold the Space Traveler 1 in 2019 for $4 million.
Wow.
It was a good return on investment.
Yeah, but he was not the only watchmaker with whom you've been working. Like, how is it hard to work with the watchmakers and to ask them to give their watches for sale?
Well, no, I mean, yeah, it is because
I think for them it's like giving out their babies. And
first, I think on the one hand, in the very beginning, they didn't like to see watches bringing like a quarter of the retail price. I mean, Patek was always the exception to that rule, and so was Rolex. But then I think they get irritated when they think they're selling watches, telling the clients not to put them in auction, and then they do. But we still have a very good relationship with all the brands because in the end, they like the publicity also.
Yeah, and the auctions is also like bringing them a publicity
with
absolutely. The crazy prices sometimes on some timepieces.
Definitely.
But in general, can you predict the raise of interest to a certain timepiece, or it's at some point unpredictable?
It is somewhat I mean, look, I wouldn't tell you that the wholesale, we know it's going to be a slam dunk unless it's all no reserve. But, you get the sense. I mean, it's all about our pricing. And if our estimates are attractive, it's like fishing. You put good bait on a fish and people bite. The fish bite, sorry. Or the people bite. Yeah. Either way. But if you overreach, then people are turned off. And you know it once you hit the exhibition if they're turned off. They don't ask for condition reports or, they'll tell you right then and there that the prices are too high. But when you get the prices right, you know how many times a watch has been out of a cabinet. How many hits on the internet. You just start to know.
How viral is the picture will be now?
Yeah.
We're counting on Instagram and YouTube and everything.
Well, we're selling 11 watches from Sylvester Stallone, as I'm sure you've heard. And
I will be in New York, yeah?
Yeah, in June 5th. The video is now over 500,000, which that's a lot of hits. I mean, he came in, he was very engaging, and he also knows about the watches, which was really fun.
But it's interesting because I noticed that the watch that he was he put on the sale, of course there are several timepieces, but one particular watch was just not even opened.
Yeah, he never wore it. He said in the video, I think, that it's like a painting, like a Monet, and he admires it. I mean, sometimes that's a big problem. Not a big problem. It's an unfortunate situation. Even I have a watch that we bought a couple of years ago, and it's basically never been worn, and I don't want to wear it. And I'm like, why did we buy this?
Yeah, but to admire as well, it's an art.
Yeah, exactly. So, many people are the same way, but not a lot.
So how do you see the relationship of Sotheby's with all these Instagrams and YouTube now?
Well, it's an excellent tool for us to get publicity, attract people to our sales, and really to get the word out, especially as it doesn't really cost us very much. I think it's made a huge difference.
For the sales, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're talking about the timepieces, what is for you how you define the watch desirability? How do you think that, okay, this watch would be like, will be
how do we
or not?
Do you mean how do we estimate them?
Not the estimate. I mean, of course, we know that there are patents that some timepieces will be always sought after.
Right.
But for example, on independent brands, how do you define, okay, this watch is a showstopper and this is something, is it personal choice or you based?
That's a hard question for me. I think that it's sort of like you follow the trends and the auctions and you see what's starting to really develop. I mean, for instance, I was at the GPHG, I was on the jury, and it's just remarkable what the choice is out there. And the fact that there are probably 2,000 people that attended that evening. Which, again, remarkable. All watch lovers of some sort. I think it's hard to predict, but you start seeing a lot of social media. It's certainly one way. And then what you hear in the industry. One
particular question to you. If there is one thing maybe that you disappointed in your industry?
So the greatest disappointment I've had in my career was in 2020 when we were called to the Islamic Museum in Jerusalem because they needed to raise some funds, so they were selling part of the collection. And that's the Solomon collection, which is, as you might know, a very famous watch collection. Famous for two reasons. One, because it's got the Marie Antoinette, and secondly, because...
Your Grail watch.
Yeah, my Grail watch. And secondly, because the entire collection was stolen, and remarkably, 20-odd years later, they found it. So my greatest regret was that we won the business, we did the catalogs, and then the week before, the Israeli, we had done all the proper licenses, the cultural, everything. Everything was done perfectly. And in the end, the week before, there was a former employee of the museum who put up a fuss. It ended up going to the Supreme Court in Israel. The president of Israel got involved, and they wouldn't let us go ahead with the sale. And we were told by the...
Because the collection was previously stolen and then appeared somewhere else?
No, because they felt it was a cultural heritage. And the crazy thing about it is that the daughter of the collector, Solomon's daughter, she had donated the watches to the museum, and there was a big stink because all the watches were in England, and they tried to block the sale, and they didn't. So they went to Jerusalem. So here we were, a week before the sale, getting really excited with all of the interest. I mean, that's when you really know, when you're like working really hard and you get lots of calls. And then the rug is pulled out from under you.
Yeah, it can be very disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, it was very sad.
Especially with all the work that you've done to get this collection.
Oh, yeah. That was really sad.
But I think that you will get some new collections soon, which will surpass this.
Exactly.
A little disappointment.
But it is an interesting story at the same point also.
Did you tell this story in your book recently published? No? Because can you tell me a little bit about your book? Because you recently published, it was, I think, at the end of last year went out.
End of last year.
Yeah, the book on 500 best watches of all times.
Actually, it was 100. Well, the book is called 500 Years, 100 Watches. So we're covering every century. From beginning to end, well, to now, not end, hopefully. And that was fascinating. Just to pick 100 was really, really difficult. And we didn't necessarily, although obviously the Graves is in there and other things, we didn't necessarily pick all the most expensive things that we've seen or sold, but things that really were representative of that particular time period.
What was the watch for the 20th century?
That's a hard one.
Yeah, I think it was the hardest choice for you.
I'm sure. Patek, a Daniels, I mean, you know.
Even Rolexes, I mean, there have been plenty, and we discussed like the age of the 70s when there was a blast of designs and in the 80s innovations that were forced by the quartz crisis.
Oh, absolutely. I think we chose like a Piaget for the 70s, you know, like a highly designed, I think. I might get that wrong. I might be getting that wrong. Yeah, I mean, we looked at the watches from design, complication, decoration, you know, from a different variety of viewpoints.
So if you want to get the book, I think it's already, you can get it online, you can get it in the shops.
You can even get it in Geneva in the shop.
Yeah.
Up the street.
So if you want, you know where to find it. But we also have some couple of questions to conclude the interview that we ask every our guests. The first question is, what is one thing that you wish people knew about the watch industry or know about the auction industry?
Well, I think I wish they understood how hard we work to really authenticate the watches, and that we take it very, very seriously because it's our integrity that's on the line.
On the average, how long does it take?
Depends on what the watch is, but it can take anywhere from, you know, a couple of hours to accumulation of hours that could total like 2 months or 3 months. You're waiting for various opinions or extracts, or a watchmaker to take a dial off. You can continue to have those conversations the week of the sale when a client might raise a concern, and then you go down and try to figure out if that is legitimate or not. So sometimes it could take months. It's true.
If you count the number of lots that you normally have in your catalog, it's a huge lot of work.
Yep, exactly. That's the thing I wish people understood. Yeah. The authentication process is not as straightforward as one would think.
So if the parts is, just out of curiosity, if the part is from the same brands, manufacturer, but from the different era, does it count as a Franken watch for you, or it's like a normal watch for some timepieces from the 30s, 40s? Of course, they needed to be serviced. And
well, the Franken watch story, and I hate that term, I have to tell you. We used to call them a watch that was married with different parts. But
there should be, like, for you, the definition of this married watch
would be a later case, a later added dial, the main components, or a movement that was replaced. I mean, you can't imagine how many vintage Cartiers. You'd be surprised that people would take them to Cartier, and Cartier would say, well, if you really want it to work, we've got to put a quartz movement in it. Now, Cartier is the hardest just to open, let alone being able to look at the movement. So, those are things that we're faced with.
Okay, so it's not necessarily like, parts from different watches that's combined together.
Obviously,
but
this is the
obvious thing, yeah.
And we try to nip that in the bud, and I think we're pretty successful at Sotheby's.
So the next question is, what are for you the 3 most important aspects or features of a watch?
Certainly, it depends on what kind of watch you're talking about.
This will be the next question.
Okay. The dial would be the first. The case would be second, and movement, believe it or not, would be the third.
And if you could only wear one watch for the rest of your life, which one would it be?
Well, last night I said, when that question was asked, that I would wear a military Patek from the 20s with an enamel dial.
That's quite a choice.
Yeah, but maybe I should pick something more exciting.
But why do you feel attracted to this?
Well, first of all, I do prefer vintage over modern in general. And I think that it has a lot of character. So for me, it's the character of the watch in addition to everything else.
And also maybe a story that comes with a...
Well, a story's nice, but we don't always have a story. So when we do have a story, that's why we get so excited. Most of the time, we don't have a story, if you think about it.
And the last question, if you can meet and have a dinner with one person from the watchmaking world, dead or alive, who will it be and why?
Breguet.
And why?
Abraham Louis Breguet. Because he was an astonishing maker. He was ahead of his time. When you think about the Sympathique, which is something I've sold 2-3 of, in a way, it was the first iPhone because you could put your watch and it would, specifically the last one we sold was the only one that he built that would regulate, set, and wind your watch. I always consider that kind of like the iPhone. And, Breguet had some trouble because he was very much selling to the aristocracy and had to flee and come to Switzerland, and then went back and had a brilliant career. And, I've loved selling his watches. The George III Tourbillon, which is an interesting story in itself, because it didn't have Breguet's name anywhere except under the carriage because it was sold to George III when the Napoleonic Wars were going on. And this is like selling your best technology to the enemy.
What would you ask him?
What would I ask?
I guess that you will talk to him about
I would say,
Marie Antoinette watch.
Oh, of course, yeah. Definitely Marie Antoinette's watch. Or how he conceived of some of these ideas like the resonance, which would have been in our Israel town. What's interesting to me is that these watchmakers were creating, conceiving, producing without the aid of a computer. Like the Henry Graves, for instance.
And without artificial intelligence, that's all around us now, right now.
Yeah, that too.
Okay, but that's would be the topic for the next discussion. Thank you very much, Daryn, for coming to us and having a discussion.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
And hope to see you soon for the next at the next auctions or at the next occasion. And that's it for today. Join me again in 2 weeks' time for the next episode, and don't forget to follow and subscribe to easily find us again. Until next time, viva watchmaking!